Welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of the Empowered Enneagram Podcast. I'm Monica LeBlanc.
And I'm Hannah Woody.
Welcome. In this episode, we are going to talk about subtypes, also called instinctual variants, and we're excited to bring you some information about subtypes because we think they're one of the most important elements of the Enneagram.
Mm-hmm. My favorite thing about subtypes is that there's 27 of them total, and they're distinctly different characters from one another.
Yeah, so the way that we're going to do this episode is that I'm going to put my student hat on, and Hannah's going to put on her teacher hat, and I'm going to be asking her some interview questions about subtype, and we'll see how that goes.
I'm a little nervous.
Oh, don't be nervous.
I had to put on my teacher cap.
I know. She'll be great. You'll be great. You know your shit.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, Hannah, hold on, student hat on. Apparently it's like a long, luxurious hat. What are subtypes, Hannah? Tell us about them.
So, subtypes, we have 9 core Enneagram types, and every single one of those types has 3 subtypes underneath it. I like to think of subtypes oriented towards animal instincts. So the subtypes are called the self-preservation subtype, the social subtype, or the sexual or one-to-one subtype. All of those are kind of basic animal instincts. So the self-preservation is the instinct to protect yourself, to make sure that you have all of your needed resources, to make sure that you have a roof over your head. It's a really, really security-oriented type.
So kind of like a bear in the woods, right? If we're thinking about it in terms of animals, like it's like a bear that kind of like rummages through the forest, but is mostly solo. You know, sometimes they have like mama bear has cubs, but mostly the bear is just like, oh, I'm in the woods. Mm-hmm. I take care of myself.
Mm-hmm. Or the instinct is to take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. It's almost like the primary concern. I think of the core personality type as a gigantic coping mechanism for how your individual type has figured out how to cope with life. And I think of the subtypes or the instinctual variants as almost like a wound. It's almost like a wound that is consistently needing nurturing. It's like something that your attention goes to immediately most of the time. Yeah. And so for a good example of this for self-preservation, a lot of self-preservation subtypes will relate to type 6. Type 6 is a very security-oriented type. Being a fear point that's the most in touch with fear, they're a lot of times kind of assessing if they're safe, if they're not safe, what makes us safe, what makes us not safe. There's a lot of security checking there. And for most self-preservation subtypes, there's going to be a lot of seeking security. And it's seeking security through getting basic needs met. Food, water, housing. I have water with me right now. And I have a tendency to carry snacks with me. If I have a long day and I haven't eaten anything and I'm hungry, it is the only thing I can think about is getting food in my stomach and eating. If like Monica calls me and she's like, hey, like I need to talk about this thing or, whatever. I'm like, I might be listening, but in my head, I'm like, I need to eat.
Oh my God, that's so funny. That makes so much sense that a lot of self-pres subtypes would relate to 6 because, right, like having snacks, having water, like that's all security related stuff. That's such an interesting way to think about it. I'm also thinking about that time that I called you in the morning, and it was like pretty early, and you hadn't had your coffee yet. And I was like asking her questions, and she was like, yeah, like the chair is really pretty. And I was like, Hannah, I asked you what the weather was going to be like today. That wasn't actually what happened, but it was a conversation that looked a lot like that because she hadn't had her coffee yet.
I was real spacey.
She was not available. She hadn't had her like basic needs met yet. But that's so interesting about the connection between self-pres and 6.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's last episode we were talking about typing, and if you find yourself really relating to the security seeking that happens with type 6, but you're not really resonating with a lot of the other core work of type 6, look at the self-preservation subtypes of all 9 types and see what you think.
So interesting. So what are the other subtypes?
The other subtypes are the social subtype and the sexual or one-to-one subtype. So one more thing about self-preservation. Self-preservation subtypes are self-referencing. So it's almost like they go back to themselves and go inside of themselves to find the answer about whatever the thing is that they're thinking about or they're pondering on. And that's important because the other 2 subtypes have different ways of referencing. And so the social subtype is group referencing. The social subtypes are not necessarily super duper social people. A lot of times that can trip people up when they're first learning about the subtypes because there's an assumption that if you're a social subtype that you must be really comfortable socializing or that you really like hanging out with people or, and that's not necessarily true at all. It's really that if you are a social subtype, you are oriented towards seeing how you fit in with a group. There's a lot around assessing if you belong to a group, a lot of pain if you're feeling like you don't belong to a group, finding out your role in a group or even what the role of the group itself is. There's just a lot of mental energy and a lot of attunement that's happening around group referencing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just thinking about it in reference to myself because I'm a self-pres subtype primarily, but social is my last one in the so I don't tend to lean on it as much, and it rarely crosses my mind the idea of being left out of something. That thought never occurs to me, and I never really think a whole lot about group dynamics or how does the group fit in or what's my role. That's not a question that I ask myself very often. So I'm thinking about that as I'm hearing you describe. And I'm also thinking about animals, right, to stick with some animal metaphor, right? Like dogs are pack animals, right? So they're always kind of thinking about what's my role in the group, right?
What is my place? What is the hierarchy?
Yeah. Who's in charge and what, how do I...
Can I be in charge?
Yeah, how do I figure that out? So I'm thinking about that in terms of got our bear, got our wolf.
Okay, bears and wolves.
Yeah.
Ooh, I wonder what the one-to-one's gonna be.
I was thinking, you know what? Well, tell us about it, and then I'll tell you what I'm thinking.
Yeah, just wait on that.
All right. Dun, dun, dun. Everything's dangerous this season.
I know. Maybe one-to-one's going to be a shark. So one more thing about the social subtype and the instinct in this comparison to kind of like our animal instincts. As humans and as social creatures, it is vitally important that we know our place within a group and that we know whether we belong or not. Right? Because if you're, if I think about how humans existed thousands of years ago, if you didn't belong to the group, if you weren't kind of scanning for that and adjusting and you were kicked out of the group, you would be placed in an incredibly dangerous situation, because as social creatures and as humans, we need each other both for our own health. We're happier when we're connected with each other and in groups. We're healthier, and also we're safer. If I think about like being in the woods with a bear, you're going to be safer in a group. So that's how I like to think that it goes along with the metaphor of that wound. It's almost like the wound that you're of the subtype that you're kind of constantly nurturing, putting some energy into, paying attention to.
That makes so much sense.
When I have a wound, and I'm like experiencing pain, even if it's really mild pain, I'm almost kind of like always aware of it. Like, you know, you move your body and you're like, oh, that hurt. And then you kind of pay attention to it. That's how I think of the subtypes, of the energy of that. Because I know for me, self-preservation subtype, I'm always thinking about self-preservation things. And then once I get them satisfied, it's kind of like, oh, okay, now I can relax and I can do other things.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Like if your left ankle is hurting, that's going to change the way you walk through the world. Yeah, that makes so much sense. So tell us about the sexual or the one-to-one subtype.
Yeah. So similar to the social subtype, the sexual subtype does not mean that you're a super sexual person. You might be, but that's not what the wording means. It's referring to the instinct to have close relationships and to bond one-on-one. You might think of that as almost like a mating instinct, which I believe is why it's called the sexual instinct. And the one-to-one subtypes, my favorite thing to kind of think about for them is that a lot of times in childhood, they had like a really close confidant. Like, I have one best friend, or I'm really close to one parent. I have my favorite dog, or my favorite fish, and like there's just this like close bond. Now, if we think about it as the subtype almost being kind of, or the instinct almost being like a wound, when sexual subtypes don't have that one-to-one bond, and that could be in life in general. That could be like, I don't really feel close to anybody. I don't really have close friends. Or it could be you show up to a social situation and you need to find your person that you can kind of get closer to and have that one-on-one bonding and contact with in order to kind of like feel a little more secure and a little more in your a little more secure in that interaction.
Yeah, so it sounds like self-pres folks need to have all of their like security, like physical needs met. And social folks need to have a lot of clarity and understanding about their role in the group. And for sexual folks, like people that lean there, they need to have like a close relationship that is in good standing in order, and all of these things need to be kind of complete before the person feels like they can relax.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
And with the sexual subtype, it could be when our subtype needs aren't getting met, it's a source of anxiety, and that's almost why there's so much intellectual energy that goes into thinking about it or to trying to get that need met. So one of our other metaphors that we like to talk about with this is like, how do the subtypes show up at a party? And so if you go to a house party, self-preservation subtypes might orient towards where's the bathroom? I'm going to get myself a drink. What snacks are available? Like there's just sort of this, where do I feel most comfortable? I will zone in on where I'm going to be most comfortable in a party, and a lot of times it has to do with what shoes I'm wearing. If I am wearing like high-heeled shoes that are really cute and like really pretty but really uncomfortable, which I make that mistake all the time, I'm immediately like, ooh, where's the most comfy chair with the best like place that I feel the most comfortable where I want to be. And I sort of like zone in on that, and then whether or not I'm sitting in that chair, there's like this part of me that feels a little more secure knowing that I know where it is. I do the same thing with like I can have some social anxiety sometimes. Most people don't know that about me because you can't really see it on the outside at all. But I do. And if I like show up at a party and I'm feeling kind of nervous, having a drink in my hand, even if it's like just water that I'm drinking, like puts this like, it like helps me relax a little bit. It soothes something in me. So if you're a social subtype, on the other hand, the way that you walk into the party, it might be like assessing social dynamics, assessing the group. What is my role in the group? Do I belong here? Do I fit in? So not so much focused on the material things that are there or the food or anything like that, but like, where do I stand with this group of people? Where does this group of people stand with me?
Yeah, that I'm actually like thinking of my own dog and how like when there are people in the room, right? Like he will figure out like who's the person that needs me, like who's the right, like because he's a pack animal, so he's like, what's the dynamic here? And he's like kind of always assessing, like, you know. And my dog's so funny, he'll like jump from lap to lap. And I think he's like, he goes where he feels like someone needs him. And he's like, okay, now my job is this. And now this person needs me to lick them. And now this person has Fritos. So my job is to look at them until they give me a Frito.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So there's like this attunement that's happening to like the group, that group referencing that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Opposed to the sexual, the one-to-one subtype, when they walk into a party, and I see this all the time with this subtype, they walk into a party and they sort of assess and they kind of zero in on who's going to be their person, who's going to be their person at that party. I have a friend that we're not super close, but we frequent a lot of the same social gatherings. And it's so funny because I sort of like float from group to group to group to person. And this girl, she's like, I always see her tucked away in the corner with one person. And they're always in this like serious like one-on-one interaction. And it happens at every single social gathering that we go to.
I can totally relate to that. Yeah, I can
one-to-one.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I think of one-to-one. I'm thinking about like, you know, Hannah and I have this park where we like to go, and there's ducks there, and you can see the ducks. I think ducks mate for life, and you can see the pairing of the ducks, and like even if there's like a big kerfuffle, like the ducks are always like focused on where's my mate. And how do I be close to my mate? And I'll like watch them on the pond, like chase each other back and forth. But they're always like aware. You can tell they're always aware of where their mate is and like working towards being closer to their mate. So sexual subtype is duck.
Oh, duck.
Quack.
Or penguin.
Oh yeah, penguin. Oh, I love penguins.
Me too.
Yeah.
That's the animal I always choose when on those like tests. Or, you know, it's like an icebreaker in a group, and they're like, what kind of animal do you want to be? I always choose a penguin.
Oh, I always pick giraffe.
Oh, really? Oh, that doesn't surprise me. She loves giraffe.
I want to be tall.
See, and I just want to be like a penguin because they look like they're having so much fun all the time. They're slipping around on the ice. Fun. Yeah. Except when you get eaten by a shark. That's not too much fun. I watch a lot of like National Geographic.
God, Debbie Downer. Jeez. It's really fun to be a penguin until you got eaten by a shark.
Well, yeah, that's how my brain works.
I know. Oh my God. She just picked up the saddest part about being a penguin.
Well, I'm a 4.
I know. And then it happened.
That happens.
Oh my gosh. So how do you figure out what your subtype is?
I think that if you're listening to this and you're listening to those descriptions, paying attention to what resonates with you, I don't resonate with the sexual subtype at all, and that makes a lot of sense because that's my blind spot. So the way that the subtypes work, they happen in a stacking where we have a dominant subtype. For me, it's self-preservation, and Monica too. And then you have a secondary subtype, and so you can probably relate a lot to that second one. And then the third one is more like a blind spot. It's something that you really like don't relate to a whole lot. And so I'll use 4 as an example. I'm self-preservation is my dominant, and then social is my secondary, and the sexual is my blind spot. And the way that I experience that in myself is that, well, I told you earlier in the episode, last episode, the block that I have around anger, and how anger is not an emotion that I feel very readily. And anger is a big part of how the sexual 4 deals with shame. It's how they deal with that inner wound is a lot through anger, competition. That's why the sexual 4 kind of has this they have a dark edge to them. They're called the angry 4, and a lot of times it's like this bulking up around feeling vulnerable. So I don't relate to that a whole lot, and that makes a lot of sense because that's my blind spot. In the stacking.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I find too that I think that the blind spot is the thing that you have a hard time seeing in yourself, but other people can see in you. So for me, my stacking is self-pres, sexual, and then social is last. And things that people tell me about myself would indicate and be in line with social. But I have a really hard time seeing them in myself. Like the social 2 is the power 2 is what they're called, and they tend to be very competence forward and kind of a more intellectual, smart, adult looking 2, which other people, Hannah in particular, tell me that they see in me, but I have a hard time seeing in myself. So it's a blind spot for me, but I can relate to the sexual 2 a lot, and the self-pres I feel like is the most consistent, but I've had a lot of trouble finding my subtype because I get confused between those 2. So tell me why I might be experiencing that.
Feeling confusion about which subtype is yours.
Yeah, certain times in my life I can see sexual 2 being the primary, and then other times I can see self-pres being the primary. So why might that be happening?
Well, there's actually a lot of theories around that and behind that. One of them that I'm not going to dive a whole lot into because that's not really this episode, but just so y'all know, we don't just grow in our core type, we also can grow through our subtypes. And so the more work I have done on my self-preservation subtype, the more I see my social 4. Just to be clear about that, how that looks. I probably don't seem super stoic right now. When I was younger, I was very stoic, very not in touch with my emotions. Nobody would have called me an emotional person at all. And as I've challenged myself with the work of self-preservation 4, which has a lot to do with stop enduring, start saying yes, start creating a life that actually serves you instead of choosing to suffer and stay in situations that you're not happy in. And as I started to do that work, I started to get way more in touch with my emotions, and I also started to talk to others a lot more about how I was doing and how I was feeling, even though it was really hard. And so that social 4 part of me started to show up a lot more. But I will say that subtypes aren't just some flavoring of your type like some of the other elements of the Enneagram are. There's very distinct, specific work for the subtypes. So self-preservation 2, for example, their work looks different than the sexual 2. Still have work, still good to dive into that part of it. But for the self-preservation 2, their big task is to almost this is going to sound offensive, and I hope no one's offended by it, but grow up, to become your adult self, because it's part of that particular subtype that there is a rejection of responsibility. There is a rejection of true autonomy where you feel like you are in charge of yourself. That's why it's called the baby 2, or the part of the fixation is kind of becoming cute and childlike. As a way to seduce others into paying attention to you and meeting your needs, instead of you standing in your own adult power, being able to meet your own needs yourself.
I'm offended.
I love
you. Beatrice Chestnut, actually, I heard her on a podcast one time say that the self-preservation 2 is the hardest subtype to own because there's so much shame around this like unconscious creation of this childlike personality to get your needs met, which like of course I totally feel that, right? Like I totally feel shame around being cute and fun as a way to get my needs met because it's so manipulative, right? Like in my adult self, I would want to be someone that would be like, yo, I need this from you, right? Instead of kind of putting on this act or being really fun so that people will like me, so that I will be safe and I will get my needs met. But I think what you're speaking to, Hannah, right now is why subtype work and why figuring out your subtype is really important. That's what I'm hearing you say, is that there's like a whole other world of work to be done when you dive into your subtype.
Mm-hmm. And I might argue that it's the deepest level of self-work that you can do, even beyond the core fixation. Like, it's like the thing, it's like the root of the core fixation. So it's incredibly important to look at subtypes. The other reason that it's really important is because it's super important for typing. I never would have found my type if I didn't know about subtypes. And there's certain types, like the social 7, for example, on the outside does not look like a 7. They typically will identify themselves as 2s or as 6s.
I've seen them identify themselves as 9s too.
And the way that the fixation shows up for them, subtypes are all about how the passion of the type. Subtypes is kind of like, how does the type deal with their passion? How do they how does that manifest?
What do you mean? What's a passion?
Well, there's 9 of them.
Okay.
For 7, it's
mine
gluttony.
Like guitar. I really like guitar.
No.
Okay.
You can be passionate about guitar.
Is mine the Enneagram?
Maybe.
Tell us what the passion is.
Well, the one for 2 is pride.
Oh, duh. Hello.
Yeah. So
no, it's not.
No, it's not. That's how I feel.
It's totally not pride.
I'm not prideful about anything.
I am not proud. So humble.
For 7, it's gluttony, and the passion's actually kind of difficult to describe, but it's like a part. All 9 types have their own passion, and it's really almost like something that the personality experiences and fixates on. It's a core feature of the type. And so for type 7 with gluttony, the gluttony doesn't mean like you eat too much or anything like that. It's more so that there is this like gluttony for life, for over experiencing, which of course what we know about 7 is motivated by the fear of being trapped, the fear of missing out on life. And so there's this like grabbing and reaching and almost over consuming of positive and of sparkly and of excitement and of those things. And the passion actually blocks you. It blocks you from something very, very important. It blocks you from health, actually.
That makes a lot of sense.
Ooh. For 4, the passion is envy. And so it's, which I would recommend, since we're talking so much this season about typing and how do you type yourself, looking at the passion and how that shows up in your life is a really good way to type yourself.
Also, I would say that if you have a hard time identifying where the passion shows up, that's good information. For me, it was really hard for me to figure out where pride showed up. Until I read about my subtype. And then I was like, oh, okay, I totally get that, like, part of how pride shows up for me is that I don't think that these things that I'm doing are bad or, like, negative or impacting me negatively. I just think that it's great that I'm so cute and fun.
Exactly. So the passion is influencing the subtype and how, like, what makes up the differences in the subtypes. And the passion is hard to own. I have a really hard time owning envy.
I can see why. That would be so hard.
No.
That would be I'm sorry. That feels like the hardest one to me.
Yeah. Well, no, they're all hard.
I know, they're all hard, but envy feels really hard.
Yeah, it feels pretty icky.
Yeah.
All of the 9 types have a passion. Let me see if I can remember them off the top of my head. 9 is called laziness or slothness. I want to do a whole episode that dives into this at some point.
I know, we should talk more about this eventually, because it is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it relates to subtype, right?
Yes. And so what I was talking about earlier was that for social 7, how gluttony shows up for them and how that's different than the other 2 subtypes of 7 is that instead of reaching out into life and like over consuming, that 7 reaches out to life to see how they can help others. It's almost like this, like, they don't want to feel that gluttony. They don't want to, like, acknowledge it. And so they deal with that by being of service to others, and sort of thinking about others' needs before their own, which sounds a lot like type 2 and sounds a lot like type 6, what they can do, but very different.
Right. And isn't the name of social 7 is sacrifice. So, like, they can look, and you know, my experience of them just in the world is that they are, like, overly busy alleviating the pain of other people, so much so that things in their own life are kind of crumbling.
Or they're not truly in touch with their own pain, because they're focusing so much on other people, which of course is like a 7 thing. There's the part of the fixation is blocking yourself from the negative or painful emotions, and that's how that subtype of 7 does it.
Yeah. So
it's really important to look at subtypes, because that one in particular, on the surface, does not look like a 7.
So Hannah, what else do you want to teach us about subtypes?
I think that might be it.
What? Subtypes. So, listen, this is not going to be the last time we talk about subtypes, y'all. We talk about them all the time. They are, in our opinion, probably one of the most important parts of the Enneagram. So if I want to learn more about subtype, Hannah, and I'm just in complete anticipation of, like, oh my God, when are they going to talk about subtypes some more? What can I do right now to learn more?
Well, you can actually go to our Instagram page or Facebook page, because we did a whole series on subtypes. You might have to dig a little bit. That was probably like 6-7 months ago or so, but you'll have to dig. But it's in there, and we give a lot of information on that. Also, if you check out Beatrice Chestnut's The Complete Enneagram, she's some really fantastic descriptions of all 27 subtypes. And if you Google it, I believe that Beatrice Chestnut has that on her website too.
Oh, cool. Okay, cool. So Google Beatrice Chestnut, read The Complete Enneagram, check out our Facebook or Instagram, and you can find some really good detailed subtype descriptions. So that's episode 2, you guys. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next episode where we talk about chicky wings. Going to Hooters, gonna eat some chicken wings.
We're definitely not going to Hooters. Ugh.
Okay, we're going to Buffalo Wild Wings, and we're gonna eat some chicky wings in the next episode.
So we're going to talk about wings if you haven't caught on to that yet.
Yep.
So we'll see you then.
See you then, guys.